You are live.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. It's Wednesday, April 10th at 5:30 p.m. I'm Dave Lyons, the chairman of the Code and Charter Review Committee. I'm opening the meeting in accordance with state rules and the Town of Dewey Beach ordinances. So we'll go ahead and start by doing a Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay. First, I just want to thank everybody for accommodating the time change this week, so I really appreciate that. We do have a couple important items today, so I want to kind of manage our time to get through as many as we can. So I'm going to start first with a roll call. So we'll just go around the room and just, Marcia?
Aye, here.
Dan? Here. Elaine? Elaine's on via Zoom. There you go, Elaine. Great, thank you. Jimmy? Here. All right, I'm Dave Lyons. We'll also go through town officials. I see Dawn Hanks. He's here. I see Fred Townsend.
I'm here. Sorry, I'm not there.
That's all right. Bill Zolper's here.
Here.
All right. Commissioner Persinger? Okay, so we're hoping Commissioner Persinger may join us via phone. He was traveling today, so we'll see if he can make it. And I think Jim is not here, correct? Jim Dedes is
No,
here?
he's okay.
Okay, great. So first item would be to adopt today's agenda. I'm going to make a suggestion, if it's acceptable with everyone here, is that we modify the agenda. We're going to take the second item, which is the discussion on permitting, and move that to position 1. And then we're going to take the third agenda item, which is a discussion on pools, and move it to item 2. And we're going to take the first item, which was a follow-up on licensing, GATRIN professional licensing, to third position tonight. So if everyone, any comments, any issues with that?
I make a motion to move that all around and adopt the agenda.
Thank you, Jim. Can I get a second, please? Okay.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Next item would be to approve the minutes from February 21st, 2024. Can I get a motion to approve those minutes?
Make a motion.
Thank you. A second?
I'll second.
Second, Rainbow.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great, thank you. All right, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and open the public meeting. First, I just want to, before we get to specific agenda items, I'm going to ask for public comment around the agenda items. I just want to go around and say, does anybody have a public comment that anybody here would like to make first in the room? And then I'll ask online if anybody has any comment. Anybody here have anything they want to bring up to discussion before we start? No? Okay. How about online? Anybody have any comments? Nope? Okay. Then we're going to move to the first item. I'm sorry, the first revised item, which is a follow-up. The agenda item is discuss and possibly vote to recommend to the Town Council amendments to Chapter 71 of the Town Code regarding building permit requirements when repairs are needed to residential or commercial properties. And specifically for those who've been following us, this relates to the ordinance suggestion Mr. Spence brought to us on behalf of Highway 1. So I just want a little backup from the last meeting, just so everybody's on the same page, is we did discuss in the last meeting creating definitions for repair and maintenance. And so I'm going to suggest today, out of our discussion, I think we approved it, but let's formally recommend to the commissioners that we adopt these 2 definitions to be included in the code. Repairs, the reconstruction, replacement, or renewal of any part of an existing building to correct damage. And then the second, maintenance, is all the upkeep or other work performed on a building to keep it safe, presentable, and functional. And construction, we defined as to build, erect, assemble, or place a building on a structure. Any comments, any discussion on that item? Okay. So in the last meeting, we decided that what we needed to do was to have a conversation with the folks at FEMA, because it is the regulations required by them for the town to have flood insurance, to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. They currently require documentation of any change that's done in a building. So we had that meeting on March 4th. Commissioner Persinger attended, Dawn Hanks attended, myself. With FEMA was Mr. Bobby Cabelli, Catherine Potter, who is a representative from Denrick, and Jamie Carpenter. So I'm going to summarize, and then Dawn, I'm going to ask you to chime in and make sure I've captured it. And then I think this will set the rest of the tone for the code. So FEMA described as a substantial improvement means any reconstruction, rehabilitation, addition, or other improvement to a structure, the cost of which equals or exceeds 50% of the market value of the structure before the start of construction of the improvement. This term includes structures that have incurred substantial damage regardless of the actual repair work presented. So based on what we heard from FEMA is that we need to document if any property is in a special flood hazard area in the town, which is, as we know, is most of 2/3 of the town, is that we at least need to document any repair, maintenance, any change that's done to the building. That's what their requirement is. I suggested perhaps eliminating repairs and maintenance from that. In a subsequent conversation, and their comment to me back was, the concern would be how is repairs and maintenance interpreted? They preferred that a town code official or code official enforcement person be actually reviewing what the town member requests, and they would be a better person to arbitrate and decide what needs a permit and what doesn't. So additionally, FEMA's requirement also requires that the town track multiple permits. So if you continue to do 5 different things on a house, they come back and look for each of the different permits because it's the sum of those individual permits. And when you modify up to 50% of the value, then that requires the building to now comply with all of their standards. So that was the other reason they wanted the town to track. I will state this, they do not care what we charge for a permit. That is totally up to us. The process by which we go through, because we've had a lot of conversations about how can we more quickly process permits through the conversation. We've also had a conversation about what is the threshold for charging, right? In previous discussions, we all discussed that the $1,000 materials was very outdated, and we had made a recommendation to increase to at least $2,500. We did review some data that Laura provided that showed that a bulk of the permits, and I don't have the exact number, but I will say it's a large percentage of the permits, are $7,500 and less. That's materials and labor. So managing that volume, that threshold, would hopefully streamline the administration effort on the town's part. If we can find a way that also accommodates FEMA's requirements, that may be something as a group we want to consider. Just a couple other things. The Dewey Beach Code currently requires a permit for any development in a flood zone, and defines that as any development as any man-made change to an improved or unimproved real estate. Bethany and Fenwick use the same language in their code. The only other thing is Bethany has one difference. In making a determination about a substantial improvement, Bethany accumulates the cost of projects over 10 years. Maybe something we want as a group to consider. So, Dawn,
Yes.
did I capture that accurately? Is there anything you'd like to add to my comments?
Yes, you did tell what our conversation was about. However, what I do need to share is that from the last FEMA class I went to, which is approximately 2 weeks ago, in talking about permitting, they basically stated any change on a property, a building, the land must be documented by a permit. And the only areas that they came back with examples of things that did not require a permit was a mailbox, a flagpole, painting, or landscape. And so those were the only areas that they gave as examples which would not require a permit. So our code, our ordinance does require permits for any sort of change or development.
Okay, and that would include currently, Dawn, painting, right? I know painting is an item, if anybody paints, it does require. So I guess in that specific, just to explore that one for a minute, if FEMA says that doesn't matter, that is something I guess the town could consider eliminating if that was something we as a group wanted to explore. that be accurate?
Possibly, yes. Those were the only 4 areas that they gave as examples during this class.
But Dawn, if the material for the paint is over $1,000 right now, based on our code, you'd have to have a permit. If it was under 1,000, then you'd be fine, correct?
Our current code in that one area talks about materials being under or over $1,000 as to whether or not you need a permit or not.
So if we raise the
and-
amount, and it's just painting to $2,500 or $3,000, and again, if FEMA's saying painting, then somebody that does $3,000 worth of material work would not need to obtain a permit.
Well, with these 4 examples, these were not defined as set in stone that you or a municipality would not need a permit. They use these as examples showing that these areas do not obstruct the floodwaters and the flow whenever there should be a flood event. And so that is their concern of obstruction of floodwaters.
Thank you.
With that, that was kind of the information I wanted to share back with the group. We've got, I'll go around the table and say, does anybody here around the table have any questions or comments that they want to make?
I think just one comment. I think it just goes back to, the fact that the $1,000 is outdated. Since COVID, material costs have fluctuated, but they've certainly gone up by at least 30%. And, I think in previous discussions, we have felt like a $2,500 or $3,000 threshold is kind of a reasonable, up-to-date threshold. I personally think that painting, if FEMA's not requiring it, it seems a bit silly that we're requiring a permit for someone to paint their house. Painting is such clearly a maintenance item unless you're new construction. It's and then it's generally permitted in your new construction. I hate to see people not be able to go out and paint a room or paint a garage door or paint their downstairs on a whim on Saturday, and they have to go get a permit. I think it borders lunacy, honestly.
I agree with that, but if you paint your whole house, that would be different. You have somebody come paint your house, a contractor.
Well,
I
think that's where the threshold fits in, the
Right.
2,500 or the 3,000.
Right,
Some of these houses cost $12,000 to paint,
yeah,
so.
I agree.
I
So,
feel like it.
so the comment is, look, if it was under whatever the threshold is, let's call it $3,000. I think we're, as a group, agreed that it doesn't require a permit.
And I think doesn't require a permit for anywhere in town, because I think what I heard Dawn say was that is like a clear exception.
Right,
So we don't
Right.
need to boggle down
Right.
permitting for
Right.
painting under 2,500 for anyone.
right, okay. Dan? Fred, any comments from the town?
Nothing from me. I didn't know if there was any public comment.
Yeah, I do. I definitely want to open up to the public comment. Alex, sir, is there anything you'd like to add to discussion? I know I'll just open up to you and see if you like.
We have 7 different businesses.
Sir, I'd ask you to come up to the podium, please. Thank you. Because people at home won't be able to hear you unless you're on the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We have 7 different businesses, and they're used so heavily. And this is why we brought this issue up literally last May. It's been almost a year. We don't have time, and we would never have enough tradesmen to get permits for everything goes on. You do a concert for 1,000 people at the Cork, you wake up the next morning, you get a dozen things to repair. So we don't have time, and and you can see this, Jim, there's such a shortage of tradesmen. There's so few. If you get a hold of them, you don't have time to go down and get a permit. It has nothing to do with the cost of the permit. There's not enough. There's not enough plumbers. There's definitely not enough electricians. You talk to Chris Schell, he'll chew your ear off. It's nobody's fault. There's just not enough tradespeople. So my complaint originally to Mr. Zopel was, we're not getting permits and we don't feel all that good about it. Just this past weekend, you know, we had a big wedding. They broke a half a dozen things. And right behind that, you understand. SCAT comes in and someone goes in, it's a nice meeting, someone goes in the ladies' room and they broke the mirror, you know. We got to find somebody who comes, you got to patch the wall, he's got to replace the mirror. He's not going to charge you $200. That guy's gone. He's $800, $1,000, $1,200, if you can get him. So lately, what we've been doing, and John's in charge of it, is we've been trying to sign contracts with people and say, like Remco is a good example. They're at our places every day. Every day? Until Memorial Day, and then they'll be there, one or two guys. So I want to help the town. We want to do the right thing. I don't want to run around and have your code inspector guy come and say, why is there 5 trucks here and 4 trucks there? We're just trying to keep up. Whatever recommendation you all can make to get us to the commissioners would be great, because we're not going to get a new rule until they can weigh in, and it's going to take them time. So whatever you think is fair would be great, whatever the limit is, whatever the rule is. I would say this, the county, you know, we do a lot of business in the county, we have a lot of work in the county. They're a little bit more focused on the bigger items. All the small stuff, you don't have to get permits with them, because their view of it is, people are going to paint their house anyway. You're not going to stop Mary Lou because her brother-in-law's a painter to paint her house. And even if you cut a limit and you say, Jimmy, if you say $5,000 or more, she's going to do her painting in 4 stages. They're going to paint the side, they're going to paint the back, they're going to paint the front. Plumbing, electrical work, the basic HVAC stuff, the basic repairs of every day just needs to have some rule from you that the commissioners can do. That's all we're looking for.
Right.
And we're not unhappy with any of these issues. I like the way the town's run, they're very fair. It's just, I feel like now that there's a gentleman running around with that little van, we don't feel all that great about it. He shows up, is that fair?
It's fair.
I said to you,
He's got a job to do. so.
he's got a job to do, and I don't want to BS the guy. He shows up at Jimmy's and there's 5 trucks and he goes, where's the permit? And our answer is, no, I don't mean Jimmy's, I mean our Jimmy's, and say, we had a party last night, they tore everything to pieces, what are we supposed to do? You know, we have to repair it, and that's all I'm asking for, just some recommendation.
Well, and we agree. I mean, one of the reasons we've been kind of going here is try and find some way to simplify this process for you, for the town. You know, we need to just get through the FEMA threshold. I think if we didn't have FEMA threshold, I think we'd come up with something that anything under $7,500, we wouldn't ask for a permit. But it's dealing with FEMA that's kind of slowing us up, so.
I don't want to play lawyer, but our interpretation of FEMA is a little different. That, because we've done so much, we have a lot of property on the water, both sides. They're not interested in repairs of any nature. They're interested if you're moving walls, if you're doing what I call construction. I would say 90% of what we're doing is the same old, you've been to the rudder, hasn't changed in 50 years. You've been in the cork, hasn't changed in 50 years. Every now and then someone breaks the side landing and we put another fence up. But most of it is not affecting the building. We're not doing much construction. And when we do, it usually involves the need as an architect, and that gets you into the whole process. So I don't think FEMA really cares about what I call the everyday maintenance of a residence or a commercial, but whatever you all come up with, we'll be happy with it.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question, Alex? So when you said your interpretation of FEMA is a little different, I think that's really what's been holding us up. And I'm wondering if you could share anything more concrete about, you know, where that would get us sort of past that at some level. Because I feel like it's kind of 2 different things.
Well, for example, we wanted to change the bathrooms at North Beach a few years back. Went to FEMA and said, how much can we do from this original building that's, 40, 50 years old? They gave us the 50% rule, and we said, well, we're going to take this space that we already have and rearrange it, make the ladies' rooms bigger and the men's rooms smaller, and we're going to put new walls and floors. They made us give an estimate of the existing building, which relatively useless, and how much this was going to cost, and they were fine with it. We did it exactly as the architect drew, life went on. Everything else that we've done at North Beach, the Rudder, which are both on the water, Ivy, which is on the water, and the properties I have on the water, we haven't gone to them with anything because we haven't really made a structural change.
Do you have a suggestion of what would work for you?
Excuse
Do you
me?
have a suggestion of what would work for you? Like, is there, I know the threshold, but like, what if, you know, you have a wedding and they tear down all the walls and fences at the Cork, and there are some other major things, but you have to immediately repair them because you have, you know, you have bookings with headliners and very expensive things, and people have tickets. It's not that you can close down to do those. So how would it be possible in your position with that as a commercial operation to address, yes, we have to make these immediately, they might be $10,000 or $15,000. We don't have time to wait for the town to open on
I'll give you a
that
good
day.
example. I understand. We have contracts with all these touring acts. We have contracts with agents, we have a lot of contracts, and they all have buried in them all their insurance requirements. We got a zillion insurance policies. That's what I call the guardian. But we had a big concert and a couple of the lights, from all the pressure and all that, a couple of lights fell. Before we put them back up, we had to have our structural engineer come in and say, are the new lights any heavier than the old lights? Would he certify? He sends a guy up there, he does his measurement, he says it can support the weight, we put the new lights up. Why? Because I had to send that to the insurance company because they're covering that. There's checks and balances. I think it's mostly, I think this gentleman who drives around should focus on construction. The repair part, we're stuck with certified plumbers and certified electricians, and everybody's certified and everybody's registered with you. That's their profession. I mean, I'll give you an example. We went today to the county with all our drawings and all our permits because we're building a house on the ocean. And they looked at all the ceilings and all the architects and all the people involved in the structural engineer, and he said, you know, we're not going to revisit all these certifications. We don't have that time anymore for the county. That part's done. I'll tell you what we're interested in. They gave us 2 or 3 things they're interested in. That's the future, I think. They're going to look at the architects and the engineers and the people who have professions and go with them. You screw up, your license is in danger. That's pretty much how the law is regulated also, and that's how banking is regulated. And I'll give you a parallel. People come to us all the time and say, you know, can you give me $100,000 on my signature? We're not allowed to do that anymore. Why? Because when the world fell apart in 2009, 2010, everybody said, what? Banks were giving money on signatures, no collateral, no wonder the country's in trouble. So how do they regulate it? They go to me and say, Al, we rate and rank every loan you make. We look at them once a year. You want to give a signature to Mr. Zopa because he's your buddy? Fine, but you're going to pay more for insurance because you're going to get, instead of a 9 or a 10, you're going to get a 2. That only happens a couple times. I get the point, which is, I'm not going to do that anymore. So I think, because I'm taking up much more time than I wanted to, whatever you come up with as a recommendation, the commissioners, I know, are going to dive into it themselves because of your concern that you just mentioned. And also, you know, what does FEMA really need? What do they need and what do they mean? I don't think they want to micromanage our town. I think if you do something that's construction-based, they want a record of it. That's what I think they're interested in.
I agree with that. If you're moving walls, they would have to be notified. But if you're replacing 4 bathroom stalls because they got wrecked, that's just repair.
Yeah,
I don't know where that.
they're not plumbers
Right.
anyway.
They're just dropping toilets in.
They don't know anything about water pressure. I think wherever you're going, you know, we'll be happy with it, and then we'll see what the commissioners might think, whatever your recommendation is.
But one, just follow, does the dollar threshold provide some relief in the process? You know, today it's 1,000, we talked about 2,500. Does that provide any relief in what you're trying to accomplish?
Sure,
The
I
dollar
mean-
threshold, just something?
Let me ask, would commercial be different than residential? Being prices of stuff that he repairs, he's
You know,
got
let
4
me ask
bathroom
education,
stalls.
does the flood insurance,
We're the minority. There are less businesses than there. How many homes are there?
1,400?
yeah,
And there's probably, 100 businesses that
Yeah.
are still alive. So we're the minority, but whatever you think, Jim. The town's not unfair in the way in which they allocate. I just think nobody wants to sneak around and
Yep.
I just don't want that anymore.
I agree, and I'd like to get a recommendation out today as a group. So I think we ought to Alex, and we have discussed, and I think we've got all the data that we can. So anybody else online? I want to make sure, is there anybody else online?
Dave, I just wanted to mention there's something wrong with the audio. It's fluttering. I don't know if it's me or it's you all.
Okay.
It might be you, Elaine. I'm hearing things fine, I think.
Okay, thanks, Fred. Commissioner Pershing, I know you're online. Is there anything you'd like to add to the discussion?
Only that, I don't know if a threshold may be part of the issue. It just seems to me, I've been thinking more and more about some sort of administrative solution as opposed to relying just on changes to the code to solve this problem. There may be a way to come to some agreement on some administrative efficiencies so that work can proceed efficiently, but yet the town has some information about what work is being done. And that's really as far as I've gone with that. I mean, there may be kind of a set of questions that the town might be able to pose that, anybody who has some work to be done could simply answer those questions. And, if the town could have that sort of information, know what the cost of the job is, and also be able to track some issues over time, some cost of work over time. So FEMA seems to be more interested in being able to do that over time. And I think, Dave, you and I exchanged emails on this. Bethany tracks the cost of projects over a 10-year period. And that's for purposes of determining what's a substantial improvement. So I don't have anything specific. It just seems to me that there may be a combination of some things that could be done administratively that would make things more efficient. And perhaps maybe making some changes, but maybe more minimal changes to the code itself.
Okay, thank you. So anyone else have any more comments?
I was just thinking that one of our recommendations maybe should be for the commissioners to look at, certainly for the businesses, but having a number of rental properties, it's the same thing. Anything can happen across 9 or 10 or 12 in a given weekend or a given checkout day that we have to address immediately. And so I really think that one of the suggestions maybe to let the commissioners look into is just sort of a pseudo honor system, meaning you get your work done, John, the code enforcement guy stops, you are able to tell him what you're doing, the work gets done the following week. If it's a threshold of $20,000, you put in a permit after the fact. It's permitted after the fact because it was, done in the moment. But I think it's a matter of the revenue loss to the town also in terms of that threshold, because for a commercial business, it could be $40,000 in repairs, but it has to be immediate. And so I'm sure the town wants to collect on the $40,000 in repairs, but I think that's the same also for some residential properties at a lower threshold. And I think there maybe is some consequence or fine of not following through with the after permitting, and knowing that the people that are doing your work are licensed and you have to provide the licenses for those. And I think maybe throw that in there and let it be open for discussion for the commissioners as some options.
Okay. So I'm going to ask for a motion, but I'm going to summarize, I think, the points we want to put in the motion, and I'm going to ask you guys to chime in. So as part of our recommendation, we're going to make a motion to make a recommendation that we adopt the definitions of repairs and maintenance as we discussed, that we suggest to the commissioners that they move the threshold for permitting to $3,500, materials and labor, that the commissioners also review with the code enforcement group any administrative improvements that can be made to the process to speed it and still comply with whatever FEMA requirements we have. I would also suggest maybe what we want to do is ask the commissioners if they would consider a difference for repairs versus, I'm going to say, some kind of substantial improvement in a business. The thing we talked about is fixing a toilet versus moving a wall. if I can use those words.
Or replacing the sink in your kitchen and replacing your cap, like the whole
Right.
kitchen. Yes, and stuff.
Right, so, that we asked, that we suggest the tracking of costs over 10 years as a way of complying with FEMA. And I think we also want to put in this recommendation, potentially evaluating the different requirements of businesses versus residential properties. Anybody want to add anything else to that? No?
No, I think that's.
Okay.
I think Fred does.
Mr.
Fred?
Lyons,
Yes, sir.
so if I recall correctly, the standard for determining whether a permit was required or the threshold question related just to materials only
Right.
and not materials and labor. And you may have meant that the $3,500 you referred to was for materials only, but you said materials and labor. So we just want to make sure we know what the motion is.
Yeah, thank you. I did say materials and labor. I did say materials and labor, but honestly, I mean, we also considered a larger number of $7,500 at one point for materials and labor. So,
I think materials is
right, I hear
an
materials.
easy threshold.
Do you have a, so I think the problem with materials is, I think getting the permit to say just materials, right? I believe, is that?
No, so I mean, you know, right now it's $1,000 for just material. If you decide that that's what it should be, $3,500 for just material, I think given inflation and the cost and how long ago it was $1,000, I think it's in line.
Okay.
I mean, Dawn would be the other person I would suggest we get comment on, but I think $3,500 for materials is in line.
Okay. All right, well, I'll correct my statement to say, no permits issued for any work where the materials are less than $3,500.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree with that.
Any other comments, any other suggestions to that? Okay, so let me restating all that again. Can I get?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Marcia. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Jimmy. And let's go around and just vote for it. So Dan.
Second.
Aye. No, we got a second. We're good. We're just gonna vote real quick, Elaine. Since you're on, how would you vote, Elaine? Yes or no? In favor? Okay, thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
I'm in
Marcia?
favor of the 3,500 for materials. Raising it from 1,000.
I think you're in it.
I have to log out and log back in now that you're that
Mhm.
good. Just take a second because this is extremely annoying. It's like bump, 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 bump. So I'm going to log out and log back in.
Okay,
But you have my vote.
okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Jimmy? Did you
In
vote
favor,
yes?
yeah.
In favor, okay. I'm also going to vote in favor. So I think with that, we've unanimously adopted those recommendations going forward.
Mr. Chair, could I just make go ahead, Judy.
Go ahead.
I want to make a comment just so you and everybody hears this. If you have an emergency repair that has to be done on a weekend, the town is not going to stop you from doing that. If it's a safety issue, an air conditioner, you've got renters coming in, some stones are loose at their pool, right? And they may trip or fall. If there's any type of safety issue, go ahead and correct it. John comes around, he'll see it, we'll make sure, and then just Monday come in and get your permit. We're not gonna stop anybody from changing out a toilet, a hot water heater, anything that's gonna cause you an issue with your customers that's gonna cause you to lose business in an emergency situation. The town's not gonna keep you from doing that.
Okay. All right, thank you. With that, we'll move on from that item. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We appreciate your input. Okay, we're going to move on to the next agenda item. That reads, discuss and possibly vote to recommend to town council amendments to the setback requirements for swimming pools.
Yes, that's mine.
There was some information posted out. I'm not sure if everybody has it or not.
I have copies.
Okay, Marcia has comments. Do you have,
I've got it.
I do know that Fred has this. Thank you.
So, basically, this is something I've been thinking about for a couple of years, and like a lot of sections of our code that were put in place in 1981 or the early 80s that haven't been revised, but lifestyles have changed, construction materials have changed, so has how we enjoy our house. And now in this era of resort living in beach towns, renters and homeowners alike really are asking for and putting in permits. We've had a lot more permits for pools, in-ground pools, above-ground pools, therapy pools, spa pools. And I wanted to address the fact that we could allow smaller dipping, spa, cocktail, therapy pools, whatever you call them, on smaller lots where a lot of these houses have only 12 to 17 or 20 feet in the backyard, and 50 feet wide. Currently, our code is 10 from each side. So that's assuming that your pool would be situated in the middle of your yard. And oftentimes houses aren't logically built where there may be a deck or something that comes out in the middle of the yard. So the middle of the yard is only 10 feet, but the sides are wider. And I want to look at bringing this more up to date to not say, okay, the code says your pool goes in the middle of your yard. And it must be 10 feet from each side and 6 feet from the back, where modern standards today, I think, well, let me just finish this, and also a 3-foot walkway all around the pool. I think I can address the really easy one first. A 3-foot walkway all around the pool is something, when I look back at many, many, many codes around the country, seem to be pulled from commercial pool codes as a safety issue. It's also really antiquated because most pool companies and modern pools are built with feature walls, they're built with fountain walls, they're built on 3 sides, and they have a full fountain wall or a feature wall with lights. So requiring that seems to be a bit antiquated in how people are using pools. As far as the setbacks, my consideration was decreasing them by 50% on the side to 5 feet and on the back to 3 feet. And I tried to think about what would be the argument for that, as in a risk factor or a peaceful enjoyment of your property or the neighbor's peaceful enjoyment of their property. And so I want to address the safety factor first by decreasing it to 3 feet. So what I really talked to 2 engineers on their thoughts on whether that would be an issue with the excavation of the hole. So almost 90% of modern pools start at 3 or 3.5 feet, and they go to 5.5 feet max. People really aren't building pools that are 12 feet deep anymore, and we could restrict that. When you look at a lot that, let's say, is 12 to 17 feet deep, and you got to come in 6 feet, so now you're down to 11 feet, and you need a 3-foot walkway all around, you're down to 9 feet. It's really impossible for anyone to have a dipping pool. And I think lifestyles right now, and I certainly think that you're seeing it just in Dewey Beach and Rehoboth Beach and Bethany, when you look at these properties, is people want a resort experience when they're coming to their resort town. They're building tiki huts, they're building very extravagant, lavish outdoor kitchens. They're, having their pools, their hot tubs. There are a number of new properties and backyards in the town that have some pretty spectacular, if you want a resort property, you certainly feel like you're in a resort when you walk out your back door. So as far as a concern for any safety risk in excavating a hole 3 feet from the rear yard line or 5 feet from the side yard line, I did speak with 2 engineers, felt there was no risk. I talked about examples with them that, we have current homes under construction, and I'll give a good example. If you go to the very back of this on the 2nd block of Cullen Street, this is a home being built on the 2nd block. It is, you will see my pictures and you will see my tape measure, the 8 to 10 foot hole of excavation is 12 inches from the neighbor's property line. So we're already excavating down 8 to 10 feet a foot from neighboring property lines at a depth that's double what a typical pool would be dug at. And you can see they are really literally where you see on page 3 of that one, this is 8 to 10 feet down with a full basement, and they are 12 inches from the adjoining proper land. So I want to use that to address any issue that might involve excavation. Same on the side. So we're at a greater on the side. I'm saying reduce it 50%, 5 and 3. The other one is that we already currently allow the code, and I have it in the first page summary, to build an auxiliary building, meaning a shed, a pool house, an outdoor kitchen, 3 feet from the side or rear lot line. And generally, if you would be building something like a 200 square foot shed, which is what the code allows, you would need to excavate down 4 feet to build your footers, build your concrete wall, and that's already permitted at 3 feet. So I think that, I'm hoping that eliminates any concerns we would have on any risk factors for excavation. I think the only other factor that I'm trying to think of, playing devil's advocate, someone would say, well, a noise factor. But I think it would be really, this is my opinion, somewhat irrational to say the noise would be different at 3 feet versus 6 feet, or 5 feet versus 10 feet. Pool is a pool is a pool. When you're in the pool, the air doesn't say, oh no, you're at 6 feet, so we've put up the air barrier and that won't travel. But when you're at 3 feet, it's free for all and it's going all over. So those were the two things, and I was hoping that Dawn could shed some light if she thought there was anything else that would be an issue to remove that. I'd like you all to look at some of the pictures of what, I've talked to a lot of property owners that are in favor of this because they have really small yards. And when I talk about the 3 foot walk around, you're gonna see the one picture on page 3. This is a dipping pool in a northeastern neighborhood, not a tropical neighborhood, built right against the property line with what appears to be about a 6 foot brick wall and a fountain. This is really a very typical small lot dipping pool. They try to get them close to a lot line and allowing them to get a small recreational pool. Generally, they're 8 feet wide, max generally 10, and they usually are 10 to 15, 16 feet long. So they are very tiny pools. If you go to the page 4, you see the same thing. This is a northeastern lot. It's a small 2 foot wall right up against their property fence so that they can get usable area. It's not very practical to have a 3 foot walkway when that was considered a safety feature when you have a wall. And so I'd like to see that eliminated, even if we eliminated it on one side, or we did a little more work to say this would constitute a barrier wall of at least 24 inches, or I think I put that in my proposal for changes. I just went through page 5, page 6. You're just gonna see a number of different examples that show you how these modern, smaller pools are being built. And I think on page 8, you're gonna see a number of them now are building them right up to the foundation of the house for the same reason, because the yards are so very small. And a lot of the feature walls you're seeing, which, you know, that's why I'm really sort of positioning this as our 3 foot walk around is a really old, antiquated requirement for today's pools, whether they're dipping pools or they're lap pools or big pools. As long as you have some barrier on one or several of the sides, that should adequately address, you know, the space you need to walk around.
Can I ask a question? I just want to.
Yep.
So in a lot of these examples here, there's smaller pools. You talked about dipping pools or
Therapy pools,
therapy
cocktail
those
pools.
kind of things, right? So smaller pools that perhaps are not as deep.
No, they're all the same, 3 to 5 to 5 feet deep generally. is
So
what
would
they
it,
are.
I guess this is what I'm trying to get to. Would it make a difference if the depth of the pool or the nature of the pool, if the requirements were different for smaller size as opposed to larger
I
size?
can't imagine why it would be, but I would say for the purpose of what we're trying to achieve here, which is address really small lots and really small backyards, that we could put parameters on. You know, this is a pool that would be no deeper than 5 feet. This is a pool that would be no wider than 10 feet or no longer than 16 feet. So it's very easy to address that. I assume if you're doing a 30-foot by 15-foot pool, you have a pretty big yard anyway.
So that's, I guess, one of the things I wanted to ask you, was trying to get to in this is, the desire here is to kind of address smaller properties, not necessarily allow somebody to put the largest pool they can. Because currently we don't have any lot coverage. There's nothing in our code today
Right.
that speaks to lot coverage for pools.
So right now, the largest pool you can put in, given our setbacks, is 30 feet long. We know that. Width is dependent on how far you've built your house. Most people are maximizing that width, so they're going back in general less than 20 feet. Generally, it's 18 to 15 feet. 12 is the setback in the north end. I think it's a little less in the mid. For some reason, it's like 10. So a lot of them are maximizing because, you know, the cost of our lots are $1.5 million to $2 million. And people are coming here and building beautiful resort homes and resort amenity. This is the #1 amenity in building construction right now, is pools, and dipping pools are right up there, the smaller
Right.
T pools. So I really want us to, you know, I'm hoping that I was able to give enough information concerning risk of excavation, which if we're already excavating a foot off a property line at 10 feet down, that should not be a concern. I feel like if you want to limit it to a 5-foot depth, that's what most of them are anyway. We could say, you know, I don't know why we would have to, except I think it would be a great thing just to move it through to the commissioners. I know there's 2 or 3 property owners I talked to that want the dipping pools, but they can't meet it because of 6 feet and 10 feet. And a lot of them are because a good portion of their yard is not just an equal yard. That's an old way we built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The house sat in the middle, everything lined up. Now we have jet outs for decks. We have other things to say. So your pool can only really sit in the middle of your yard because we have a 10-foot setback for a pool. We have an 8-foot setback for a house. And certainly when we're building an 8-foot house with a basement, our construction hole is 8 to 10 feet deep, a foot off. So I really think it's just to give property owners more options to have another resort feature. And I think the current code with the constructions of sheds and auxiliary buildings 3 foot off the lot that can be 20 feet long by 10 feet deep, which will require a 3 to 4 foot excavation.
Okay.
So
I want to just ask if you have anything else to add? I kind
No,
of want to get some conversation.
yeah, I'd
so
like
maybe
that.
we can get to some movement tonight
Yeah.
on this one. So I'm going to start with the committee members. Does anybody have any other questions or comments?
I have a question.
You go ahead, Elaine.
So, how does this jive with the whole thing that we started out in the beginning of this committee about the trees? Because we're protecting the trees and the yards there's no really big lots. There's some bigger than others. So can you address that?
I can. So if you're excavating for a shed, which we allow to be 3 feet off both sides, your house with a basement, you're gonna have to remove trees anyways within 6 feet of that, at least, because of the roots. And if you are leaving a tree where you're cutting in down 3 to 4 feet and excavating and not removing a tree 6 feet or closer, you're likely destroying the whole half of that tree's root system, and that tree is probably gonna end up in a collapse or a dead situation. It's gonna be completely imbalanced and not be safe for the house. So already, I know when I have done basements and excavations, the arborists have recommended we remove trees within 8 feet of the excavation line for that reason. So I don't think it really changes, because it wouldn't change if you were putting up an outdoor kitchen or an outdoor shed or anything else.
Elaine, other questions?
Yeah, and how many, since you have one pool, I believe, is that, or do you have more than one pool on your property?
I do.
So when you talk about people would like this, since you know these properties really well, so how many pools do you think we would actually have? Because if everybody could put a pool in, it would change the look, which is the 10-year plan of how we see our town. And also having a shed and then putting a pool closer to the property line. I do think there could be a noise issue because I think that takes away from a landscaping that you could put in that would help with noise and privacy. So how do you, because I know that you're a very, you want the place, even though it's a resort town, you want the uniqueness of this resort town and the quaintness of this resort town to not be lost in the exuberance to just make it a vacation spot.
Well, I think that, I don't think it really makes a difference. You're not required to put any noise barrier in when you put a pool in 6 feet from the property line. You could have a straight lined grass all the way to the end. And I don't think we're in the business of telling property owners how to landscape their houses. They can also put trampolines in the backyard and have screaming kids all day on trampolines. Our code actually permits a tennis court and a pickleball court in the front yard if you have, and our code also permits if you put a tennis court or a pickleball court in the front yard, that the fence requirement is waived for those installations. So you actually wouldn't even have to adhere to the 3.5-foot fence restriction. So I just don't, I don't want to see us getting caught up in the weeds and start to become labeled like Rehoboth, which is the People's Republic of Rehoboth, telling everyone what to do with their private property and how to live it. There's not going to be any difference, in my opinion, in noise if you have a pool 6 feet from the yard and it's 30 feet long by 18 feet wide and it can hold 25 people at one time, which is what you could be permitted to build, than if you built an 8-foot by 12-foot dipping pool that holds 5 people. So I think if we're going to address pool noise, it's a way bigger issue of not allowing pools, and I don't really think anybody's going to be willing to go there at what they're paying for the prices of the property. As far as keeping the character of the town, I think, that's within reasonable boundaries. I mean, for many reasons, that ship has sailed 8 years ago when our property lot values escalated to over $1 million, and they're continuing to escalate. And I think if you even look at some of the new construction on the north end, we've got some really interesting modifications of flat roofs and very modern California-like houses, which I don't think anyone envisioned. But these are what people want when they buy these kind of properties, and they are within our code. And so I don't really believe that the noise would be an issue compared of we're allowing a 30-foot by 18-foot wide pool anyway.
Anything else, Elaine?
I'm confused about, I understand what you're saying, and I think it's an issue that it is not, when I think of the People's Republic of Rehoboth, I think of the People's Republic of Austin, which is extremely liberal, right? But I guess I would say that this is an issue that it would be nice to know how the people that do, I can't put a pool in. If I could get rid of the pool we had, I'd do it in a second where we are, but that's a whole different story. But I think that this issue of just, it's the setback is not a small amount of space. It's quite a significant amount. And that's probably, I would think that the reason it was put in was to discourage pools. I don't know. And so now if you decide that you're going to make the setback less, that you will get a lot of people coming in and putting pools in. And I think a lot of trees will come down. And it's just something that I'd be quite interested to hear, not just anecdotally, but like people talking to the council about this issue when it comes up.
And I think that's a good open forum for it. I think if we can get it to the council, you're going to have more people coming up for some of these issues that they want to see changed. And again, just going back to the setback, 6 feet or 3 feet, if you're putting a pool in, you have to take all the trees out around that pool. So that's happening anyway. 201 Carolina is a good example. Elaine, if you want to drive past there, they've just dropped a pool in, and pretty much all the trees in the backyard came out at the recommendation of the pool company. So that's a full backyard with about a 30-some foot backyard. So all the trees. I don't think it's I don't think it's a point where it's making a difference whether you're putting in a shed, a pool, an outdoor kitchen in terms of tree coverage. So I hope that would just eliminate that concern. And I just would say that when everybody jokes about the People's Republic of Rehoboth, that's a pretty well-known representation of what you'll hear everywhere in town. You know, people do not want to be told what they do with their backyards or front yards within reasonable code. And if our code already allows pools to say, well, we as a committee or we as individuals don't want pools because that might do this, that's subjective, and that's not our position in this.
Okay. So I just want to, Elaine, you have anything else? Because I want to try and get around to everybody else quickly, and then I want to.
No, I think everybody pretty much knows what
Okay.
my questions were.
Jim, you have questions, comments?
I just look at this picture, and this is a house, not a pool, right?
That is a basement.
Okay. So if it was a pool, it would be a lot different living in this house, having a pool that close, I think.
Well,
Just my opinion.
first of all, that's a foot.
No, I
I'm
know,
just
but
showing the
if this was a
excavation.
pool, the excavation doesn't
Well, your
concern me.
pool would be, currently it's 6 feet from the property line. It would now be reduced in this proposal to 3 feet.
So we're basically doing that. It just,
But what would the difference be?
if I lived in this house, I'd be upset.
Well, I think you'd be upset if you headed 6 feet because you're going to hear the same level of noise.
I disagree with that. But, I mean, that would be my concern, just
I-
the people that bought their house 10 years ago and didn't have a pool right there, and now all of a sudden there's gonna be a pool right there, that would bother me.
I think the way to address that, if we can move it forward to the commission, is to get professional level recommendations and opinions on those concerns. And I'm glad you brought that out because I'd rather have them addressed. I'd like to get this moved forward at least to the commissioners. And I would like, even if Dawn or anyone else has any concerns like that, that we can concretely address with data. I think then it releases it from being subjective to an individual.
Okay. Dan, do you have any comments that you want to bring up?
No, I just wanted to hear from the town.
Yeah, I think I'd like to move on to the town too. So I'm going to start with Dawn.
Yeah, that's fine.
Do you have any, I guess,
Now, I want to hear what Dawn says, 'cause
Yeah.
I do have a question about the space and the 15%.
and Fred, I'm going to come to you too, right after we hear from Dawn. So Dawn, I guess you did some research on this for us, so why don't you give us the benefit of your research?
That research basically boiled down to and came to the end result was each municipality or the county, they established their own rules when it comes to setbacks, pools, pool sizes, and so forth, and what they feel as being safe or not. You saw what Bethany does. The county is similar to exactly what we have. Rehoboth, I could not get full details on. However, I know they do set their own rules and regulations. And so it's per municipality. In response to 201 Carolina Street, those trees were taken down without a permit. They will be penalized. And of course, those particular trees will have to be replaced per our town code and the new tree ordinance. So just because trees are removed, it does not mean that there's a free rein, that they do not have to be replaced. They do. It must be on the property, and our new code does talk about specific heights and sizes of trees and kinds of trees that must be replaced. So property owners do have to realize that requirement if they want to put in a pool, put in decks, put in whatever. Just because you want to take a tree doesn't mean you don't have to replace a tree.
Mm-hmm. And that is true. And if they were taken down, of course, they'll be penalized. But I think my point I made before was if you're putting in a pool, what the installation would consider safe is any tree within 6 feet of that pool line because of the root system would need to come out. And so I have certainly put in pools where those removal of trees were permissible because they were within 6 feet of the pool excavation line, and not just for pools, but also for homes. I mean, I had several trees removed from a number of my properties permitted because they were too close to the they were 6 feet within the yeah, and the arborist considers that dangerous.
Dawn,
So-
go ahead, Dawn.
And of course, I know the arborists are the ones that we need to consult when it comes to tree health. It's very important. However, I have also had other arborists not give that definition of 6 feet away. It has to do with the diameter of the tree plus another half of that. Then that's what they consider a potentially problematic situation for the tree. So I do think that also depends upon the arborist.
And I think that could be addressed too. I think we could get, arborist reports, but I think it's also keeping the balance of, we are allowing excavation 10 feet deep within 12 inches currently.
I guess the only thing I would go back though is, I do believe that trees are an important aspect, character of the north end, certainly north end. There are not so many in the south end, but certainly in the north end. And I think as a town, we've kind of stepped up to say, hey, we care about these trees, we want to preserve these trees. We made code changes to do that. I personally, and I have a pool, when we put the pool in, I preserved the tree. I had an arborist come in, we did special cuttings around the root, we had the tree fed. So I'm a big believer in trying to maintain trees, and I think anything we can do in the code to support the trees and the beauty of the town, we should do. So I'll leave that, and it's I can hear it's substantial, or opinion dependent, depending on the arborist and the construction person and everything like that, so.
Okay. Just a comment, to remove it from opinion dependent, we are already allowing sheds, a 200 square foot structure, outdoor kitchens, auxiliary buildings, 3 feet from the property line, 3 feet from the side, 3 feet from the back. So I think to say a pool can't be at that is sort of saying we don't want pools.
Right. Okay. Anything else, Dawn? No? Okay, thank you.
So I have a question for Dawn. So Dawn, will any of this affect the 15% that we need to leave as green space? Because what I'm finding a lot in the north end now on a couple different streets is the amount of water that's coming off the lots now that we have these slopes, and it's all to code. But we're getting a lot more water on the streets than we have before. We've gotten a lot of rain this year. But this won't affect the 15% at all, will it?
That particular code has to do with the natural plantings that are required on properties, and especially when there's brand new construction, that is enforced. However, over the course of time, it does seem to be that residents forget that they've got to have green space or natural plantings. And this is the desire to have the area that would be less than just a concrete jungle. However, that is something that is happening, that folks they don't want to have to cut their grass. They would rather have something totally concreted over, totally unnatural, so it's less work all the way around, or potentially less cost to them because they don't have to hire a landscaper and so forth.
But the pool that we're looking at here, that doesn't change our 15% green space at all, right? Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I think if you wanted to put a pool in and you were at the minimum, you couldn't put a pool in if it interfered with the 15%. You still have to have it.
Okay.
And I would also say there is just an avenue to, if someone came in and wanted to put a pool in, they've already paved over their whole front yard, then it may affect it. So I think the recourse would be they either have to correct the violations in their front yard to get a pool, or they don't get a pool.
Right.
I agree. I also I'll express a current concern. I walk around town, I see a lot of people have taken the front yard and just filled it with stones, right? And I'm not sure people park in those stones regardless of the 2 parking spaces that they're supposed to get. They park everywhere on the lot. So you see a lot in the summertime when visitors are here with lots of guests. So I think that's maybe something we want to consider as a group, whether or not what we can do to manage that.
So my hope was, I know we had this on for February and it got moved, and then we had it and it got moved, was I wanted to provide at least enough data to get it moved to the commission. And I think, you know, we can get more data, we can get more open discussion, you can get more residents. And if you get a flood of people who say, yeah, we do want to single out pools, you can build sheds and trampolines and everything, but no pools. I think it's a good place to
So I
open
understand, I
discussion.
want to get to Fred because we are past our 6:30 time.
Okay.
And so I want to see if there's consensus to move it forward or not. Fred, from a legal perspective, is there anything to consider here?
I just have a couple of comments. I don't, I agree with the discussion that we just had, that whatever other zoning requirements are applicable, you know, I don't think what's being proposed, and Ms. Schick concedes this, is meant to trump any other zoning restriction that would apply. So the ability to fit a pool into an area that it's not currently permitted wouldn't be regarded as some kind of right, despite the fact that there was insufficient natural area on the property. So I agree with that discussion. I had a comment, though. I'm certainly not qualified to speak to the prevailing pool construction techniques or the need for walkways, but it was my understanding, and I think I've just picked this up from attending other meetings, that the 3-foot walkway is a safety issue, but not so much focused on excavation, but just an ability for somebody in the pool to climb out of the pool in the event that they were desperate to do that. So I think the prohibition against having structures nearer to a pool's edge than 3 feet was not to create a circumstance where someone couldn't climb out of a pool at that point. But that's just my recollection. I think that's something you may want to look into. Maybe Dawn can speak to that. I also thought that Mr. Lyons' point about dipping pools was an appropriate question, and that is that if dipping pools and cocktail pools and these smaller pools, spa pools, are driving the request, then maybe we should define these pools in the code and consider applying different rules to them than we do to pools that are larger. Because right now we have one definition for swimming pool, and that encompasses hot tubs, as I understand it. They're treated the same way as the larger pools, and we don't have any special rules for the smaller pools. So that might be a methodology, might provide some flexibility that we don't have if we're restricting the size of the pool to something that we're envisioning when we're making this recommendation. And then I had a question about outdoor kitchens. Our code doesn't allow any lot coverage other than for structures, as far as I can tell, which is somewhat unique. Are these outdoor kitchens that we're talking about, are they roofed structures?
I think the ones that I've seen are roofed, and there are already a number in Dewey Beach. So I think outdoor kitchens, though, in general, can be totally unroofed, meaning it's a nice area with a built-in grill and a little beverage refrigerator, no cover, and others are cover. So I think if we were defining those maybe at a different meeting, we might want to make some code around it. But I'm 100% in favor and think that if we wanted to recommend, we look at defining different code regulations on size of the pools, depths of the pools. I don't think that's
Is that a fair,
objection. Yeah, I think it's very
that's a fair
fair.
compromise?
I think it's fair.
Okay. Anything else, Fred?
No, I don't have any other comments.
Are hot tubs considered pools?
Over 24 inches,
24 inches deep.
24 inches deep.
I mean, I know 5 houses that have hot tubs right up against their fence.
Right?
I'm sure.
I just, like
You
a
know,
dipping pool would be an 8-foot, like this little space right here, right?
Pretty much would be that.
Right, that spot. So let me ask, since we're getting close on time tonight, can I get a motion to move? I'm going to try and summarize this. Can I get a motion that we move this to the commissioners with a recommendation that they evaluate setbacks for, and I'm going to put it for, I'm going to say first thing, that we create a definition between, I'll call it large pools and dipping pools, if you can bear with me for that definition for a minute. And that perhaps the commissioners consider different setbacks for these smaller pools. And I also would like to float the idea of the group of having the commissioners explore some kind of lot coverage around pools. And I don't know how that sits with the group, but a lot of the other communities do that. And so I was just kind of wondering, but my concern, I'll be real honest, is by making these setbacks smaller, that we're just going to get larger pools on lots, as opposed to what I think you're trying to accomplish, which is.
To have a different standard for a small lot,
Right.
small pool.
Exactly.
That's
That's what I
fine.
think.
I think
I think
that's a
that's what
good
you're trying to
compromise.
accomplish, right? Right, so I'm just trying to
Yeah.
come up with a compromise that perhaps addresses the concern for these smaller pools and smaller lots, but preserves some of the character of the community.
I think that's a fair compromise.
I'd make that motion.
Thank you. All right, can I have a
I
second?
agree with the size of the pools and all that.
All right. So then I'm going to ask for a vote. Elaine?
You're
I can't
muted.
hear you.
You're muted.
Do you want to type yes or no?
No, she's muted.
Can she hear?
Sorry.
Yes.
Well, I guess we're just sending it along with that particular thing that more research has to be done on bigger and smaller pools. Is that, and you're sending that?
Our recommendation is that commissioners explore the definition of smaller pools and the potential to have lesser setbacks for these smaller pools.
That's fine with me.
Okay.
Favor.
Jimmy's in favor. Marcia?
Obviously, I'm in favor.
Okay. Dan?
Yes.
All right. I'll also support that. So that's unanimously carried, so we'll move it forward to the commissioners.
Thank you.
With that, since it's 6:45, I'm going to ask for a motion to conclude, adjourn.
So moved.
Dan first. Can I get a second? Jim.
No, I want to stay and finish the last one.
Let me ask, I should say this. We're going to take
I'm leaving.
we're going to take the agenda item, we move to the end, and we're going to bring it to the top, and it will be the first thing considered in the next meeting.
Hey, there's, one thing that you definitely should have when she said tennis courts and, what's it, the other ball? What's that thing that everybody?
Pickleball.
Oh, that's a big one. They should not be allowed to have that in their front yard. You'll have World War II.
Well, I can tell you most people couldn't, but if they could.
Yeah, that will be something to bring up in a
It would
future
be.
conversation, what goes on in the front yard, so. Okay, with that, I think I have a unanimous vote to adjourn. All right, thank you, everyone, appreciate it.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.